Hello, good afternoon or good morning. My name is Dr. Anthony Schrag. I'm Senior Lecturer in Cultural Policy and Arts Administration at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh. I'm also an artist and practitioner who's been working in the realm of social engagement for far too long. I have been working with the Stove to explore some elements of creative placemaking and just wanted to use this short video to maybe share some of my findings, but also to talk a little bit about some reflections we've been having about it together with the Stove and also within the context of academia. Matt's video about creative placemaking touches on a lot of the sort of main contextualizations of placemaking, which just briefly, if you've not seen this, it touches on this idea that creative placemaking stems out of a notion of placemaking, which is a sort of geographic term exploring notions of how we create spaces that people want to be within, and creative placemaking obviously sort of adds an element of artistic practice into that. Historically and theoretically, over the past, I suppose, 2 decades, that has meshed and merged with a lot of developments of social practice, participatory practices, socially engaged art, community arts, all these sorts of different frames of engagement, and they come with different sorts of histories, different sort of lineages. And these are important to reflect on because I think there's different intentions around working within these spaces, so not all of them are necessarily creative placemaking, and indeed that they're not all domains that could contribute to specifically making a place better. They might be more oriented towards activism, they might be more oriented towards education, towards health. But I think it's important to kind of reflect on the fact that the way that creative placemaking is being developed and used within the context of Scotland and broader afield in the sector is where a lot of multiple different things are starting to combine. Those of policy and governance, where they are trying to sort of develop places, and those of the creative sector who have been working in the field of engagement. I think some of the things that we've been finding which are quite interesting, relating specifically to the Stove and to some of my external research away from this subject is this notion of the boundary crosser, and I suppose that's where creativity really works in this sector. And what we mean by the boundary crosser is that things that are able to jump through different sort of sectors. So you have someone who might be able to, or have a project that might be able to work from the point of view of, or from say healthcare to housing to environmental to tourism, and they might be able to sort of develop a project that crosses all of those boundaries, as opposed to those that just sort of stay rigid within those sectors. And certainly this is what we see the Stove doing quite uniquely, is framing that space being a way that they can be the boundary crosser, or the metaphor that we've been using is a question of an adapter, someone who can actually, a bit like when you go overseas or go to a different place, you've got a little machine that allows you to plug into this thing, but it actually gives you power for a different sort of shape. So how do you create that little translating mechanism? And this, in a practical sense, is really important within the creative making sectors, because I suppose from the point of view of the arts, if we look at historically questions like social practice, community arts, they've kind of sat within the domain of arts. They've kind of sat within that policy or that framework which says we make art and that's it. So how you take that out and actually operate in multiple different sectors is very important, and that's some of the stuff that we've noticed within the work of the Stove. We're developing a paper which should be published relatively soon, which talks about this, but I thought what I would end with was a little bit of a diagram that I've used to maybe help explain what this practice looks like, and actually as a sort of a way, not as a provocation, but maybe as an example of how other organizations might be able to think through this notion of being a boundary crosser or an adapter within the sector of creative placemaking. So what we have at the start is a sort of is a domain. So in this context, we're talking about Dumfries, and you'll have different sort of domains again that's working: education, healthcare, local government, and this could be anything. This could also include agriculture, leisure community. It could be multiple different sectors who might be interested in a shared experience. Now that could be, as with the Stove, the town centre, but it could equally be something like immigration, it could be food security, it could be anything. But they're all loosely interconnected domains that are operating kind of in silos. Then what you could do is you introduce the creative element, which in this context is the stove. And the stove reaches out to these different domains and uses creativity to work with them, to draw them in, to have different ideas, to have different contexts. And what from that kind of starts to break down the barriers between these different domains. Once those barriers are removed, there's a little bit more of a porous activity between these. You don't have those rigid demarcations between something that is healthcare but also something that's possibly heritage. They start to relate to each other. And once that's opened up again, you can start to feed in those different sectors into each other so that tourism and local government are working more cohesively together through creative activity. This in itself is a pretty important place to operate, because the creative act, i.e. in this instance the stove, is bringing a lot of people together to work on a shared issue. But I think what's important to recognize within a lot of placemaking is that we don't want to centralize the art within that. The art is merely one of these domains. So actually the next step, or a following step, is actually a little bit more complicated, where indeed the creative organizations who are operating on creative placemaking aren't the ones that are working at the center. They're merely broken down those barriers, kind of dissolved those barriers, and are now operating as an adapter that different sectors can work together without the creativity. So this kind of diagram hopefully, I suppose, helps explain some of the concepts that we've been thinking about in regards to creative placemaking, which is something that can operate, creative organizations that can operate across sectors and break down those barriers and boundaries using creativity. Sadly, I'm not able to attend the conference and the seminar to discuss these matters, but I know that there will be many, many good conversations to have, and I would be very keen to continue having conversations with people as they go forward. Wish you all the best, and take care.